Heading into week 5 of the fantasy football season, here's a few tight ends I looked at on the wire this week. The first guy, Uzomah of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Uzomah, we saw flashes of good games from him last season, but this year we haven't seen much until that week 4 matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, where he went for 5 catches, 95 yards, and a touchdown. So right here, he's available in 98% of fantasy leagues. Here in week 5, it's going to be a tougher matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. But right here, Joe Burrow, this is going to be a big test for him in this offense. And if he has confidence in Uzomah as a security blanket, I think he can make a few plays this week. Obviously, I don't think he's getting 26 fantasy points again in PPR leagues, but he could get anywhere from 8 to 10. And if you need tight end help, Uzomah is definitely worth an ad this week. The next tight end is Dalton Schultz of the Dallas Cowboys. So Dalton Schultz now, the last 2 weeks, he's been one of the best tight ends in all of fantasy football. Week 3 versus the Philadelphia Eagles, 6 catches, 80 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And week 4 versus the Panthers, 6 catches, 58 yards, and a touchdown. And he even dropped a touchdown in this game as well. So he's a Dak Prescott favorite. Last season, Schultz was really coming on until Prescott went down with the injury last season that cost him the year. But right here, week 5, a great matchup once again for Schultz and the Cowboys versus a weak Giant defense, and the Giants give up the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends this season. So Schultz here, first 3 out of 4 games so far, double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues, and I think he'll hit that mark once again versus the Giants. And he's still available in a whopping 67% of fantasy leagues, so fantasy owners should definitely go out there and add Schultz on their team. The next tight end's AlieCox of the Indianapolis Colts. So last season, AlieCox with Phillip Rivers had a pretty good season, and this year we haven't seen much from him until in week 4 versus the Miami Dolphins. He had a big fantasy day, 3 catches, 42 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 5 targets. It's a little fluky, obviously, 3 catches and 2 touchdowns, but right here, he's a big guy. He can make plays in the red zone, and that's what we saw versus the Miami Dolphins. And in week 5, it's another good matchup from AlieCox here at the Baltimore Ravens, who give up the most fantasy points so far this season to tight ends. So right here, he's more of a deeper league ad than these other guys here as Cox, and he's available still in 99% of fantasy leagues. The next tight end is Dawson Knox of the Buffalo Bills. So last week, I mentioned him as an ad on the waiver wire, and he got added in 38% of fantasy leagues, but he's still out there right now, Dawson Knox, in 53% of leagues. And he had a big ball game in week 4 versus the Houston Texans. 5 catches, 37 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 8 targets. So he's a Josh Allen favorite, especially in the red zone here. And so far this season, he's been very solid in PPR leagues with all 4 ball games, 8 or more fantasy points for Dawson Knox. And in week 5, it's going to be a crazy ball game at the Kansas City Chiefs here for the Buffalo Bills, where this ball game could be in the high 30s to even the 40s with these 2 great quarterbacks in Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. So that's a Sunday night football game, and both these teams are going to go up and down the field. So it won't surprise me to see Dawson Knox in this game at Kansas City get 20 or 30 yards at least and find the end zone once again in the 5th and final tight end I've looked at on the wire this week's Max Williams of the Arizona Cardinals. So Max Williams, a few weeks ago, I mentioned him as a waiver wire ad after he had a big ball game in week 2 versus the Vikings. 7 catches, 94 yards. Week 3 at Jacksonville, he didn't do anything. 3 catches, 19 yards. But week 4 at the Rams, another big ball game for him. It was 5 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown. In week 5, he's got a good matchup versus the 49ers. He's available as well in 99% of fantasy leagues. But right here, anyone who's got a decent role in this Arizona Cardinal offense definitely should have fantasy value, in my opinion, because Max Williams, he's a big target. Kyler Murray, he spreads that ball out to everybody. We see it every week. Hopkins, obviously, Chase Edmonds out of the backfield, Ronaldo Moore, AJ Green, Christian Kirk, Max Williams. So some weeks, some of these guys will have the bigger games, and some weeks the other guys will have big games. That's just the way this Cardinal offense is rolling. So right now, if you could have patience with Williams on and off for weeks here, he's definitely worth an ad. He's a big target. He's making plays. He's getting more targets, and he's a guy to get. So that's a few tight ends I've looked at on the waiver wire for week 5 of the fantasy football season.